Welcome to another edition of When School's Not Working. I'm Matt Barnes, and I am so glad to be here. So glad to invite y'all participation in today's conversation. I run an organization called The Education Game, and we help families break out of the mold of traditional school. And so we coach parents around how to do that. I will now take a moment to introduce our other leaders in this conversation. And can we start with you, Kath?
Sure, thanks, Matt. I'm Katherine Frase. I'm founder of Workspace Education and our research and development company, 100 Roads. And we're exploring alternative landscapes for education and different options that families can take if school's not working for them, or if they would like a change, or they just want to put their child first and not the system first. I'm very happy to be here talking to you guys, and especially to our special guest tonight, but I'm going to pass you on to Michael.
Thank you, Kath. Thank you, Matt. I'm Michael Strong. I'm the founder of what is currently branded Expanse Online, but which is going to be receiving a brand new brand any day now, the Socratic Experience. And it's because we focus on deep Socratic experiences and real-world projects. And we create a really warm, highly intellectual community that is fun. And Matt, I'll let you introduce our special guest today.
Fantastic. Well, I'm honored, privileged, humbled. What else? Excited, a little embarrassed maybe to introduce Blake Boles. Blake is one of the leaders in the idea that school can look vastly different. Learning can look vastly different than what you typically imagine. And so Blake is the founder and director of Unschool Adventures. He's written several books, a couple of which my family and I have read and we love and we use. His most recent book is called Why Are You Still Sending Your Kids to School? He's also wrote College Without High School, which is a book that we have used a little bit in our house. He's done tons of presentations. He's been in the New York Times, Christian Science Monitor, BBC Travel, Fox Business, TEDx, Huffington Post, on and on. We're so glad to have you with us today, Blake. Welcome to When School's Not Working.
Thank you, Matt, Kath, Michael. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So I'm going to set this up, and I've been thinking about how to do this because we want to spice this up today. We want to make this a little bit of a spicy conversation, Blake. And so my daughter, who you interviewed, maybe, I'm not sure if she interviewed you or you interviewed her or both.
I interviewed her for my podcast.
Okay, cool, yeah. Cool. And she thinks you're cute, which that's a conversation for another time, Blake. I need to talk to you about that deal. And secondly, though, more importantly,
here.
That's too spicy. Here's the question I want to start us with. When you talk to a parent or a young person and they are afraid of making a leap into that uncharted water of non-school or unstructured education, what are the one or two or three things that you tell them or express to them that help them to be more comfortable with that idea? Let's start there.
Two things. What's the worst that could happen? And let's really play this out. Like, what's going to happen? What is the direct line from you leaving conventional school into the gutter, right? And then the second question is, what's the potential upside? Like, how good could it get? And both of these questions take a lot of exploring, because we have these knee-jerk initial reactions, which is my world will fall apart if I leave school. And what good thing can happen? I don't know. It's hard for me to think about that. So spending time with each of these questions and dwelling on them, that's the first place I typically go.
Excellent. Excellent. Great idea. By the way, guys, so you know, I've got a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old, and we're working through some of this. So a lot of my questions, I'm going to pretend like it's somebody else asking, but it's actually going to be me. All right. So who's up? Who's got the next question for Blake?
So I always like to ask why people aren't normal. Of course, we celebrate not normal, but the normal thing is actually to believe in school. I think of it as the prominent church of our society, that you should go to public school. And so how did you become an apostate and come to the wilderness with us?
Heretic.
I guess I was raised in the church, and I was devout, and I was showered with gifts, all metaphorically speaking here, of course. yeah, I was able to perform well in the school game. And, that's kind of an ego boost, and you feel like you're on the right path in the world. But there was always a little something nagging at me when I was going to California public schools, and I couldn't really put my finger on it. And it was only in college when a friend handed me a book by John Taylor Gatto. And I just read a few pages of that book, and I said, uh-oh, something is changing here. Something is waking up. Because I thought I wanted to be a high school science teacher, maybe. And Gatto essentially said, we're mostly wasting kids' time. I'm an award-winning New York City public school teacher, and I have mostly been wasting my kids' time, and I just don't want to do that anymore. And that's why he quit. And that was such a powerful, eye-opening thing for me to see. I just couldn't ignore it. So that's when I started reading all the other books about the alternative education stuff. And soon I left the church, Michael.
Well, thank you. Just before letting Kath have a go at you, I always, I once knew a really great teacher, actually one of the best teachers I ever knew, who after reading Gatto felt guilty for remaining in the classroom. And so I always wonder about people in mainstream education who can read Gatto and not feel more or less guilty. So kudos to you for actually reading him and seeing the light, to continue our metaphor.
If I can just comment on that, Michael, I think that you can read John Gatto and say this guy's a conspiracy theorist, and say that he's just a little bit too far out there. And so I read his long book, The Underground History of American Education, and I don't always recommend that to people, because you can, if you flip to a random page, there could be total Gatto enlightenment, and you flip to a different page and it's, something like the Illuminati industrialists are plotting to keep everyone down. And I'm just not thoroughly convinced by that argument. I'm sure there's some truth there, but that's one reason I can imagine some people might write off his arguments.
No, I totally agree on that book. So thank you for that correction. Totally agree on that. But the 7-lesson school teacher, where he basically says it's training kids to be passive and dependent. For me, almost anytime I'm in a conversation with somebody, I send them 7-lesson school teacher, and they get it or not.
Agreed.
Oh, that one, scripture for me. But go Kath.
Yeah, okay. So I'm thinking you've got these, let's say you've got a teenager and you've sort of explained that, you actually, there is this option, if you did leave school, like you could leave school and they're sitting at the dinner table, where would they even start to go down a self-directed path? Like, I know that you just said those 2 questions. I think they've made that decision now. They've done that work. They've made the decision. Like, where do they even start to begin a self-directed journey?
I think you have to know what all the options on the table are. And most people are just not aware of that. When I was in high school, I was not aware of the options. If somebody said, consider homeschooling, I'd be like, I don't know any homeschoolers. And the second that I look around, I'm not immediately inspired to join the local homeschooling co-op, or maybe it's all little kids. It can feel very alienating if you don't know what's out there. And some people do genuinely live in deserts when it comes to alternative educational options. And so it's a very difficult situation. But there are so many other people that live close to some sort of cool alternative school or self-directed learning center or a cool homeschooling co-op, or there's some public hybrid charter thing that your family doesn't know about. And so just doing a little bit of research, this is where parents come in. This is why this idea of the completely autonomous teenager unschooler who completely rises out of school on their own. I think that's a very rare story in reality. It really is a parent-child partnership, and parents play that role of researcher, and they read books, they read blogs, they go check out podcasts like this one, and that's where it begins.
I love your expression, sort of alternative school desert by analogy with food desert, because you're right. I happen to live in Austin, which has arguably the richest ecosystem.
Mecca.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, a lot of people don't have these options. And so I think the urgency around food deserts, we need to feel this urgency around, saving people from the alt school deserts.
But I also love the way that you said it's a partnership. Sorry, Matt. Between the parent and the child, and the importance of a parent sort of taking on that role of parent coach. And I know that that's really what Matt is specializing in. So do you want to tell us about what you think and your experience with being a parent coach?
It's a tough space because it's so variable, depends on the child, depends on the family and their circumstance. But you know, one of the things I like about Blake is he mentioned this idea that the purely autonomous learner is pretty rare, and I think that's right. We've gone back and forth around too much autonomy, pulling back a little bit, having me be a bit more of a engaged coach to find the right balance. But these young learners are exploring and they're trying to figure things out, and they do need help in doing so. Otherwise, it can be overwhelming. In fact, if anyone was watching me about 2 o'clock this afternoon, they would have seen me sitting with my daughter. There were some tears shed around you know what comes next, which is actually to my next question for Blake.
But I wanted to jump in on this subject.
Please.
Of parents,
jump
because
on.
Every once in a while I get to do some parent coaching, and often it's often a mom who is new to unschooling and seems to have this idea that unschooling is about totally letting go of all control, all restrictions, all expectations.
Right.
It's a very, you know, purist way of interpreting unschooling, in the same way that you know, there's lots of alternative schools out there and democratic free schools, and there are Sudbury schools. And within the realm of Sudbury schools, which are more or less democratic free schools, you know, there are ones that are more orthodox Sudbury, and this is a real religion analogy we're drawing out here.
Yeah, no kidding.
But there are very orthodox Sudbury schools, and there are less orthodox ones. And the highly orthodox ones, which follow the original Sudbury Valley School model, they're very serious about adults not intervening in a kid's life. You should wait until a kid literally brings you like a pressing question before you try to help them in any way, because adult help can so often turn into some minor form of intrusion or oppression. And I definitely, you know, I was very drawn to the Sudbury Valley School books early on when I got into this, and I'm really glad that they exist. I'm glad Sudbury Valley exists. And I feel like a lot of people have also gravitated towards these rather extreme or orthodox views of unschooling or child-led learning, because it's an ideologically pure way of understanding this. And it's this almost total pendulum swing of saying I'm going from a controlling parent into a completely hands-off parent. And so this is one of the things I find myself talking with a lot of parents who are new to unschooling about, which is it's really not, you don't want to be on either side of this pendulum. Like, there's this happy broad middle where it is a partnership between parent and child. Parents can say, listen, I think you might want to consider this. Have you thought about this? Here's an option. And that doesn't have to be seen as a form of total intrusion. Of course, parents can stumble, and it can feel like, you know, a consensual offering when really it's not a consensual offering. It takes time and finesse. But that's a big subject for the parents that I talk with.
It's huge. That's one of the reasons I like talking to you, Blake, and I like your work, because I have lived it, I've seen it, and I've actually seen it blow up, where a child is given freedom without responsibility. And that to me is a really dangerous pattern to put a child in, where they can do whatever they want, but they don't have to deal with the responsibilities of their choices. So that's maybe a conversation for another time. But Blake, I do want to get back to this question around the fear that parents and young learners have about abandoning that which is traditional and typical is paralyzing. And so I want to go back to more intelligence, more of what you might say to the family that says, okay, I want to try it, but now what do I do? Because college is the next step. And if I do something different, I'm not going to have a shot, or my child is not going to have a shot at college. How do you ease that fear, or at least talk to someone about that concern?
So just in general, stepping away from the traditional path, I think will always be scary, because we're social creatures, and teenagers especially are extremely socially oriented. And so to imagine that you're sitting here playing Minecraft while your peers are learning things, which we mean, you know, being forcibly taught things, and maybe there's some learning happening, and they're doing the normal things, math, history, foreign language. That's a very unnerving situation to be in unless you're an extremely strong-willed individual. And so it requires a lot of support. It requires a community. If you feel isolated as a self-directed learner, that's a very challenging situation to be in. Now, to the college question specifically, I like to be a bit of a realist when addressing this concern, and I'll say, yeah, you might not be going to college the same time as everyone else. You might not be getting into the same college, at the same highly ranked college that you might have if you put your nose to the grindstone for the next 8 years and just focus on doing college prep stuff. This is all completely feasible. And I know unschoolers and other self-directed learners who go to colleges and go to like good colleges. The number that I know who are up in the Ivy Leagues, the upper echelons, it's few. And so what I like to say to parents is you can look at the research and you can also look at the anecdote, and they kind of say the same thing, which is that a kid who chooses this alternative path is going to more or less end up in the same situation as they would have if they stayed in school, compared to their like socioeconomic kind of bracket where they come from. This is a way of saying like there are larger social and economic forces at play here that lead to long-term outcomes. Yeah, your kid might not be ready to go to school, to college at age 18 because they've been avoiding math since you let them have control over their education. And so they don't know how to do pre-algebra. The idea is if they are ready to go to college and they have some skin in the game, they have some personal motivation to go, then all of these skills of self-direction that they've been developing, they can then use that laser and focus that laser on the problem of doing the math necessary to get, fulfill the prerequisites or take the SAT or ACT or whatever it is they have to do.
Yeah.
And so, yes, maybe that will take them an extra year, and then they'll be going to college at age 19 instead of 18. Yeah. But I see it just as often happening the other direction. They end up going at age 16 or 17 instead of 18. Or they start taking part-time community college classes. And then they make a smarter decision about the four-year university that they go to or don't go to, heaven forbid.
Yes, agreed. We're seeing the exact same thing in our household, no question. Yeah.
So
yeah, I love the way, oh, I'm sorry, please.
Go ahead, Kath.
Well, I just love the way that you've now taken that pressure off the parent to finish in a certain time window, because it's that time window that I think really forces parents to make their child do things that they really don't want to be doing at that absolute time point. So just to remove that conveyor belt, right, that pressure to just conform to the same time schedule as everyone else, I think is such a huge benefit, because now you're free to actually really listen to your child and make really smart decisions about, and help them make smart decisions about what they're going to be doing during their teen years. I love that. Sorry, Michael.
So that's okay. One of the things that I would like to hear more about is, I know that, you have these trips that you take teens on. And, I'm actually very concerned about the parents that just let kids do whatever. I'm very much on the kind of structured end of alternative schooling. Kind of the liberation end of Montessori, but the structured end relative to the radical ones. And when I think of, I just trust that you do a good job with teens, but the reason I bring it up on trips is that danger exists. And so I think it'd be really helpful for you to talk about how you think about boundaries and safety. I want to say in a non-coercive way, but maybe that's not your language, but how do you kind of set the right sort of whatever it is, such that you can take kids, well, first maybe talk about the kind of trips you've taken kids on, and then how do you make sure that, you don't lose them all the time?
Yeah.
That way.
Great question. I'm happy to talk about it. So yeah, my little travel company is called Unschool Adventures. It started in 2008 because I had a dying love for South America, especially Argentina. And I wanted to go back there. I wanted to work for myself. And I had recently met a large community of unschooled teenagers through Not Back to School Camp, the summer camp. And so I sort of smashed that all together and threw a trip out there, a 6-week trip to Argentina. And we had 9 teenagers come on the first trip. And that's pretty much been the model ever since. I've never had a desire to scale this up into some larger company and have other trip leaders going off. It's like, no, I want to be traveling here. And I enjoy working with these teens. And I get to learn about unschooled teens through the process. That's what has helped inform a lot of the writing that I've done. So yeah, I've been leading 1 or 2 trips a year pretty much since 2008, minus the pandemic. And we've gone to Argentina a number of times. We've gone to New Zealand, Spain, Nepal, Southeast Asia. I'm taking a group to Mexico in January 2022. And it's pretty much always a group of roughly a dozen 14 to 19-year-olds. They almost always come from the US. Sometimes there's Canadians. And so let me say a few more kind of introductory things, and I'll tell you about the risk management aspect of the trip. You have to apply to get onto one of these trips. And then you have to be interviewed by me or one of the other trip leaders. And not everyone who interviews gets in. And the 2 things that we look for in these interviews is, do you know what you're signing up for? Like, did you read the webpage? Did your mom just apply to this trip for you because she thinks it's a good idea? You know, are you consenting to this? Do you know what you're getting yourself into? And the second thing is, do you already have some experience being away from home? You know, a 6-week trip abroad should not be the very first thing you do away from home. Like, do a week of summer camp, or go live with some family and friends across the country for a couple of weeks. Do something like that. So it's a very it's a highly selected group of teens to start with, Michael. And that's, I think, a big part of the reason that we have a perfect safety record, and that no one's ever been, you know, injured or lost or any sort of scary situation like that. And then on the actual trip, you know, there are rules. I'm not a person who thinks that like every rule is some sort of horrible thing that we're doing to a kid. It's like, no, before they pay me any money for these trips, they get sent all the rules and agreements, and they have to consent. They have to sign off on every single one of these. And it's basic stuff like be nice and respectful to everyone else in the group. And other things like, if you do, you know, if you're drinking or you're doing any sort of non-prescription drugs, then, you know, you're out, one and done, bye. There's also rules about sexuality. There's rules about, you know, you have to sleep in the place where we say everyone's sleeping. And so there's a good number of rules, but when we're actually on the trip, there's a high degree of freedom and autonomy. And that's because I always loved the parts of the trips that I got to do as a teenager, where there was very little, I guess there was still structure, but, you know, we weren't being told to do with every minute of our time. It was those liminal spaces, those in-between spaces where we just got to like walk around the town with our friends and go find a cafe. That's what I loved the most. And I decided that should be the primary experience of these trips. And then we'll also do some structured like group hikes or cultural stuff. And so I create a framework. They have breakfast. They have you know, some sort of group activity that they can opt in or opt out of. They have a good amount of free time each day. And then we provide dinner. We have a group meeting. We have a check-in. We make sure everyone's doing fine. Everyone has what they need. I know where everyone's sleeping. They don't have a bedtime. I just say, make sure that you're functional tomorrow when we start doing stuff. That's it. If you can function on 4 hours of sleep, more power to you. If you're not functioning consistently, then I'm going to tell you that. And I'm going to say, you need to do something different because this is not working. And yeah, I could go on, but maybe that's too much detail.
Well, no, I think it's perfect detail. I'll pause and then I'd love you to go on.
Okay.
And one of the things, you know, so I think Kath at Workspace was brilliant at creating a container and a community and culture. And, you know, my question to all of these people is, when do you kick people out? Why do you kick people out? What are the rules? I think that the most successful self-directed learning experience include what are often invisible boundaries. And I think it's absolutely essential for our movement that we become much more explicit, and I would say even proud about whatever boundaries, because I think in order for freedom to be successful, we have to talk about those, because otherwise people just say, oh, we do whatever we want, and then bad things happen.
Yeah,
so
because this ideal of total freedom is just so sexy in a certain kind of romantic Rousseauian way. But really, there are boundaries and rules and social norms everywhere. And that was something that frustrated me about my school experience, is that the school authorities could just kind of, whip together a rule or something that I'm violating or something that someone else is violating. And all of a sudden it felt very, very jail-like. It's like there are all these rules, but you only know 10% of them. And so you can get, in trouble at almost any moment. And that just felt so unfair to me. That felt like that's not the kind of society I want to live in. And so I agree with you, Michael. It's important to lay out all the rules and expectations explicitly in the very beginning. And as an adult, then you stick to them and you don't bend them in either direction. You don't play favorites and you don't become a hard ass all of a sudden either. You say, this is what we agree to, because that's what respect is. It's like, we know what we have agreed to. This is consent.
Yeah. Well, and I also love just on the rationales. I think one of the reasons is often rules seem arbitrary and meaningless, but be functional tomorrow. I don't care how much you sleep, but be functional tomorrow. And if I can imagine a group, if somebody's consistently not functional, like, hey, so-and-so kind of tired every day, what's going on? And just everybody gets that. It's very real.
And it's not easy to come up with these rules all the time either, because, for example, if we're in Spain, where young people start drinking alcohol at age 16 or earlier, culturally, legally, and I'm saying, no, 19-year-old in my group, you're not allowed to drink here. They might say, what's the justification for this rule? So then I have to go down a little further afield and say, well, listen, if my program gets a reputation as a place where teenagers can come and drink and kind of do stuff that they wouldn't be allowed to do back in the US, and there's this differential because there's 14-year-olds and 19-year-olds in the same group, and so we're saying some of you can do this thing and others can't, then that means that my program is not going to survive for much longer, and then I won't be able to offer these opportunities to other young people.
Brilliant.
Yeah, honestly, you don't have kids, right? Like, I
don't know.
Okay, so because what you're describing is very much like the coaching I give to parents, right? I say things like, it doesn't matter what time they go to bed if you have an appointment at 8 o'clock and they're dressed and ready to go. That's the goal. And so, and functional, to your point, right? So we tend to get backwards, I think, around creating rules to enforce activities without going upstream and helping the child understand that here is a structure under which you can live with wonderful freedom. But without rules and responsibility, there actually is no freedom. And there's a ton of experience about that in quotes we could throw around that issue. All right, here's my next. You want thoughts about that, or
no? I'm ready. I'm ready for the next one.
Okay. I'd like to talk about expectations, because that was a little bit what you were getting at. Expectations can be positive, right? Because they motivate. Here's a high bar. They can also be a noose. With a child who now, or a person who feels like they will never measure up to that bar. Help us understand a little bit of how you might think about expectations for a young person that is now moving away from a space where there's expectations about grades, expectations around, I don't know, attendance, bizarre kind of expectations like that. What type of expectations would you imagine for someone who is in a unschool, I don't even like that term, by the way, but a non-traditional educational structure?
Yeah, highly self-directed.
There you go. Thank you.
It's delicate, and it can often really differ based on the individual, but I'll try to generalize. I do believe that the deschooling period is real and important for most kids. I think that the rule of thumb of give them 1 month without expectations for every year that they've been in school is a good rule of thumb. And I know teenagers who just, they left school next week. They're like, all right, I know what I'm doing. I'm working on it. And they probably benefited from a higher level of expectations from parents and other adults in their life. And I also know teenagers who are like, oh man, I stopped going to school in 8th grade. And for 2 years, all I did was X, Y, or Z, rock climb, play video games, read young adult novels, crochet, etc. And so there can be a lot of variety here, but I think once that deschooling period is over, hopefully what has then been established is a base level of trust between parent and child again. And the child knows that the parent is not going to ambush them with some sort of like, and now here's a math quiz. You know, I was just kidding about giving you freedom. Now you have to go do this. You know, once they've gotten past that and they say like, wow, my parents have just let me watch Netflix for the past month, and I feel kind of crappy just watching Netflix. I realize this now. It seemed so appealing when I was in school, and all I wanted to do was go home and watch, insert series name here. And now I see, I kind of feel like a waste of space, and I'm not really doing anything important. And so what happens next? I think it's that moment right there where the boredom has been experienced, that then the expectations can reach this sort of steady state of, hey, I don't really care what you're working on as long as you're not like selling drugs out of the garage. I don't care what you're working on as long as you are engaged. I think that engagement is the best metric possible for like, this is what I expect from you, which means like, I want you to be into whatever you're doing. And that doesn't mean that you don't experience any stress. There might be stress involved when kids play World of Warcraft and they're super into their clan or whatever. There's a lot of stress involved in that situation, but it's positive stress. It's stress that they have chosen for themselves. I also think that in the long run, boredom should be minimized, and that should be another reasonable expectation for a self-directed learner, which is, listen, if you're spending most of your time sitting around bored, like you're just doing this on Instagram all day, and it's not like you're researching something on Instagram, like you're kind of going down this negative mental health spiral, then that is a reasonable expectation. Low boredom, high engagement, and then mental health symptoms, I think, are a good like kind of red line that you never want to cross, which is, listen, you know, you can print out something from some medical association and say, here are the symptoms, signs and symptoms of clinical grade anxiety and depression. And if whatever you're doing leads to these things appearing as, you know, assessed by us, your parents, then it's going to be time for a change. And there might be some more, you know, more intervention here and less, you know, us playing it cool, because we don't want you to end up in that dark place.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question, Matt?
No, that's great. No, I would hope that folks listening to this can take that same description of what you described and layer it onto the traditional school. Because again, this is data that was published in 2013. 25% of kids that go into college, that start a university, are on some sort of mental health drug. That is 25%. So that means all through high school, they have been struggling with mental health disorders that are way out of line with normal. And so there's something in the public traditional model that is just unhealthy. And so what you're saying now is, when a child is not in that space, we can actually be much more attentive and paying attention to making sure that child is healthy. And frankly, a lot of the pressure in the traditional model, you know, my kids saw it, it leads very, very clearly to some of those mental health issues that you described. So that's really helpful. I think that's a good framing of this. So thank you for that, Blake.
And I would kind of add, you know, I'm glad, Blake, that you are not with us, as it were, the most radical ideological unschoolers. And part of it is, I think, normal humans, one of my metaphors is that, and this may sound strange, but like if a mama cat has a baby cat that's not doing the right thing, the mama cat will definitely, you know, pick him up by the scruff of the neck and move him across the room. Or, you know, that is, even in the natural world, parents do play a role. And I think ensuring engagement, not boredom, is a very good, simple recipe. And not ensuring, we can never ensure vis-a-vis somebody else, but
promoting.
That those are signals, that those are meaningful signals. And just very, very simple sort of signals.
And sometimes these signals lead families to curious places. I know a lot of parents, again, it's a lot of moms who discover self-directed learning, unschooling, you know, whatever their cherished model of alternative school may be, you know, when their kid is in utero, and they essentially groom their kid to participate in this alternative form of education. And oftentimes that sticks. And then I've also seen it when the kid's like, no, I am not engaged here in this, you know, homeschooling co-op. I'm not engaged in this school that, you know, you started so that I could attend it. Thank you very much. But I'm just not feeling it. I want to go do mock trial. I want to go play basketball. I want to go have this, you know, for better or worse, like traditional American middle school or high school experience. And then the parents are like flabbergasted. And it's like, well, is this part of the recipe too? Am I still a good unschooling parent if I let my kid go back to school? And, you know, thankfully, I think most parents say yes to that question. And they probably realize that they don't have that much choice in the matter either, because they can see that it's just going to make their kid miserable to force them into this, you know, hippie alternative that the parent loves for their own ideological reasons, but clearly the kid is not thriving in.
So let me pause on that one though. I mean, since we live in a culture that so powerfully glorifies the traditional school, I mean, from media, I mean, it's like, it is the thing to do, right? That is where all the fun, that's all the drama, the good and the bad drama is. There is a current of, you know, a current that you have to actually begin to fight against to be able to say no to that cultural norm. And so I have seen many kids who feel pressured to go that direction. And the coaching that the parent is providing is, hey, let's keep blowing up what's possible. And instead of thinking about school versus what we're doing now in traditional school versus what we're doing now in this homeschool, unschool, whatever space, let's think about school versus a new designed learning environment. What does it look like? What would be the thing that actually is the most exciting for you? Because the unbundled school is actually becoming more and more common, which I think is what you're getting at, Blake. You can play basketball now in lots of different places. You can do drama and debate in lots of different places.
Sometimes,
depending
yes.
on your, that's right, depending on your environment, right? But again, I wanted to point out though that pressure is intense for a young person to say, gosh, I want to go to prom. I want to have to, you know, be one of the cool, cute girls or cool, you know, popular boys. That is really strong.
Well, I think there's a second half to this story, Matt. And so I agree with you. As a parent, you can continue coaching and saying, let's try to do more cool stuff. You know, going to school is not necessarily going to solve all your problems. Sometimes the kid is just so curious that you just have to let them do it. And then within a week, they'll be like, oh, whoa, this is not like High School Musical. This is not what I've been watching on.
It's not like Glee.
Yeah, this is not Glee. There's a lot of boredom. There's a lot of like teenagers here who clearly are not enjoying their time and just, you know, sleeping through classes. And so oftentimes all it takes is a few weeks or a semester or a year of the traditional school experience to sort of get that bug out. Then they're like, I'm so happy to be a homeschooler again. Thank you so much, family.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot too.
Yeah, that's my daughter.
Yeah.
So I'm keeping my eye on the clock, and I realize we've not talked about your book. So tell us about your book and why you wrote it and what's in there. You can even tease people enough so they're excited to buy it.
Well, just the title of this show is so aligned with the title of the book that it's scary. Yeah, I published this. Actually, my editor told me that I have the award for the worst timed book title ever, because this came out in May 2020, just as the pandemic was really picking up steam and no one was sending their kids to school. And so a bit ironic there. So I've written some other books about how you can go to college if you don't go to high school, about what you can do instead of going to college to still become an educated person, and what it means to be a self-directed learner. And this book pretty much takes all the previous stuff, condenses it, and adds a lot of new material that I've been researching for the past 5 years. And so some of that new material includes research on the history of parenting and the modern intensive parenting phenomenon, which is a very, very interesting subject, especially for someone who's not a parent himself, but who has worked with lots of other people's teenagers. It's very interesting to hear the academics describe what intensive parenting, which is very related to helicopter parenting or tiger mom parenting, is like, and see its connections to school and our beliefs about education and what we think is appropriate for guiding young people towards a successful future. So yeah, got some of the parenting literature in there. There's a more nuanced discussion about the pros and cons of going to college. And this has evolved so rapidly over the past 15 years. The price of going to college has exploded so much over the past 15 years. When I went to college in the year 2000, I was able to go to a really good public university, UC Berkeley, for the tuition cost of about $8,000 a year. And at that price, my parents were able to just pay for it outright. And I think of what the situation is like for young people going today. And so that's one of the arguments I make in the book is college has many positive aspects. It has many potential drawbacks. The situation to be avoided in this world is not raising a kid who decides they don't want to go to college or tries to muddle through life without a college degree. The situation to avoid is raising a kid who assumes that he or she must go to college because everyone else is doing that, and really they have no good place being in college. They're not motivated to be there. They're going for the wrong reasons. They go there, they take on a year or 2 or 3 of student loan debt, and then they drop out because they realize it's not the right place for them. And then they are 21 years old with $50,000 in debt, and that is a hard place to be in. That is the losing scenario. And so many young people who are traditionally educated end up in this scenario, dropping out at a freshman year. It's shocking and scary and a bit abhorrent.
So many.
And then one other thing that I really touch on in this book is the question of how do self-directed young people learn how to work hard? Because I think that is a big kind of existential question for a lot of parents, which is, well, maybe my kid is not working on stuff that's super relevant to them in school, but at least someone's forcing them to work hard. When I go off to my job during the day, they're going off to their job and they're learning how to work. And if I let my kid do this self-directed learning thing, that's not really work. That's like a vacation. They're just hanging out, especially when a kid is super into video games or something else that doesn't look traditionally productive. And so I tackle that one head on with research, with psychology, and by taking on the whole question of gaming. And I draw from my own personal experience as an avid video gamer and computer gamer growing up in the late 90s when the network computer games were just becoming a thing. And I talk about how motivating these games are, and they've only become better. I wish I grew up playing Portal. I wish I grew up playing Fortnite. These games are incredible. And we have to pay attention to those 2 factors of engagement and boredom. Why is it that my kid will not, will battle me and go to bed crying because of homework, but at the same time will be trying to finagle any moment they can to play Fortnite? And they love their teammates and they love the missions, and they're every time that you do something cool in one of these games, the reward is not the end of the game, which is what the reward for doing your homework is or taking a test is. The reward is you get to do another harder thing in the game. When you beat a World of Warcraft quest, you get a harder quest. We need to pay attention to this. Anything like this, and of course you can go too deep into gaming. Yes, that's a thing. But anything that is game-like in this sense, that a young person is so thoroughly engaged by, they're never bored by, they go into this state of flow in which they forget about bodily functions and they don't realize it's dinner time. That is something to be nurtured. That's how they learn to work hard.
Kath, what were you going to say? You're on mute.
I was going to say, okay, Michael, are you ready to take him on?
Go ahead, Kath.
No, I was just going to say that, yes, I watch my son play computer games, and there's a ton with a lot of there's a lot of strategy involved, and he does love it. But I also see the addictive power and opportunity cost of him, maybe finding it more difficult to read or not reading as much as I would like him to read, those sort of things, because it's just so alluring, right? And because it's so alluring, I think there's a danger of the kids having a monoculture in very not very much variety, because they just are going beelining to that, right?
Can I try pushing back against this, Kath?
Yes, please.
Okay, if your same kid, your son?
My son, yes.
Your son, if he was as intensively into reading the great books as he is video gaming, what would your level of concern be?
0.
0. Why?
Because I've been brainwashed by the traditional system, and no, but also because these are great ideas, and I want him to ponder these things, right? I want him to have a great books education too.
If I could interject, so
Please.
I would have a similar concern, Blake. I would have a similar concern if my child became what? I'm not sure the term. Just
monomaniacal.
Yes. Thank you. Great language. Yeah, I would be similarly concerned. It would be the same, if we can draw an analogy here, with a child who eats the same meal every day, right? Okay, as your parent, I'm going to insist that we explore, right? You don't have to have, food that you don't like, but we're going to continue to introduce other things into your diet because it's good for you. You may not want it, but I'm going to be the parent here. I'm going to insist that be done. It'd be the same thing for a kid that loves to play basketball all the time. All right, great. You've gotten exercise. We need to now explore other areas. So again, this is back to this freedom versus responsibility piece. And as the parent, our job is really to train the child for adulthood, and adulthood is not, monoculture, monofocus.
Well, let me push back against you, Matt, because
Please.
I think there are some adulthoods that you get rewards from being monomaniacal. I think Silicon Valley startup culture is an example of this. I think someone who gets very into programming and wants to become some sort of freelance programmer and wants to spend all their time doing that, they'll become an economically successful person in this world, and they'll be rewarded for this intense focus and intensity that they put into their work.
And good. We're mixing it up a little bit. Good. I was wanting this. So my pushback to that, though, Blake, is at some point they're not going to be in my home, and when they're not in my home, they can become as individually focused on anything they want to do. They can play basketball all day long, but when they run out of money, they can't come and ask me for help. Mm-hmm. Right? That's part of being an adult, and so that's. I'm perfectly good with that when I am not paying their bills and supporting their lifestyle. So,
yeah, I think
more than that. Oh, I'm sorry.
There's such a broad middle here, because I feel like I've known families that take your approach, Matt, and it totally works. And I know some families, some parents who said, like, we tried to just like nudge our kid into like broadening their horizons a little bit, and it was a nightmare. It was just chaos. It was like crying and fights, and it's like, this kid just wanted to eat pasta with butter on it. And it's like, we tried everything, but they just want their damn buttered pasta. And so at some point, the parents say, we gave up, and we let the kid eat buttered pasta because we thought, what's going to happen for the next 5 years if they just eat pasta?
Sure.
And our lives have become so much simpler ever since that. So I'm just saying, I've heard stories from all across the spectrum, and it especially, again, as a non-parent, it feels difficult to make any strong generalizations here. So I agree with you, and I've also seen other stories.
Amen. And that's also why I start by telling parents, I do what I do with my kids. I don't tell you what to do with yours. Here, let's talk about the options and let's kind of explore. So yeah, I when I describe things, I'm not saying that others should do it. I'm saying this is kind of where I've come down, and for folks that want to talk through it, we can find out what might work. So yeah, I'm the middle is huge, though, to your point.
And I think there are a lot of options out there that the kids just aren't aware of, and so, as a parent, I do feel that, we need to be searching and finding these things and feeding the periphery of a child's interest, or expanding their horizons, getting them out into the real world, doing, really great in-person, high quality experiences, because you need to balance, you need to be finding that balance. Like if they're online a lot and they're loving the computer games, well, that's fine, as long as that's, they're still having conversations with people and they're still engaging in meaningful activities, and just have that balance piece.
And I'm going to go up a level, and then I'll let you in, Blake. But rather, Matt used the term middle ground, and Cass said a balance. I want to talk about both the importance of judgment as well as the importance of conversations like this. That is, I think one of the ways that school has reduced us as human beings, school as an institution, is that I think people, when I think of indigenous tribes, I think of people sitting around the campfire talking about stuff all night, every night, and I think we human beings, we need to talk about things. And I think talking about how to raise kids, how to be a human, how to figure out what we're interested, how, all this, I think talking about this is important. And I think if the default answer is you should be in school or you should be doing this X, then we're not really figuring it out. So just wanted to add a little bit of nuance to the balanced middle ground thing. No, let's figure it out. Let's help find the best solution for this person in this situation. So
right, and it's conversations. So I think, Michael, you're so right. I think it's conversations that are key, because if you're talking to someone, they have to pay attention to you, right? You cannot be on your computer doing something else because you just cannot pay attention. And I think that, that's why what you're doing is so powerful, and creating these solutions where everyone's talking all the time, having a lot of different chance encounters, and meeting people and doing in-person stuff wherever possible, I think is really important to the future of what we're planning.
I want to tie together like so many different threads right now. Just Michael, yes, historically we live in small communities and we're all hanging around talking with each other all the time. And you're not just talking with your parents. You're talking with the neighbors, you're talking with your uncle, you're talking with your grandma, you're talking with your little sister. And this is something that honestly scares me about the prospect of parenthood, which is that it's so atomized, and we all isolate ourselves in these little castles that we call houses. And I don't see kids walking around on streets anymore. I got to spend some time living in Germany in recent years, and for a place that has outlawed homeschooling completely, they sure give a lot of autonomy to young kids walking around by themselves outside. It's a very interesting contradiction. And in the book, right after I make the argument for like video games can be totally cool, I then say, and when I do my work with teenagers, we don't sit around and play video games. We go off, we do like wilderness programs. We go traveling in foreign countries. We do writing retreats. We do these things that are intensely social and adventure-based and field-based. And sometimes I hear from parents afterwards and they say like, my kid had no interest in spicy foods. And then they went on this trip, and they never say like, you, Blake, inspired them to love spicy food, because that's not how it works. They say the other kids on the trip, said, hey, you should try this. It's pretty good. And then my kid tried it, and all of a sudden they like spicy food. And so just getting kids out of these little bubbles that they're in, these little repetitive shells of school classrooms, and then getting them into new environments with non-parental adults, also other teenagers or whatever, other young people who are similarly motivated to do the same kind of challenge that they want to do, whether it's a wilderness thing, whether it's skateboarding, whether it's something else, I don't know. And then that is what expands boundaries. Just bouncing in between the home environment with this kind of isolated nuclear family, and then going to the school environment, which is an institution most akin to a jail with jail keepers, that leaves so little room for pushing the envelope and for experiencing the wonderful breadth of life.
Great point. Great point. Excellent. Excellent. I'm
It was
looking at the
beautiful. Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
No, I'm just looking at the time. Michael, you were going to say?
Well, I was going to say it was such a beautiful speech, and I realized we missed a question from the audience, and so it was some time ago. But let's do quickly the question from the audience, and we can have the Matt question and the Kath question. So our audience asks, and this was some time ago, my wife tried organizing other mothers to homeschool who were very interested. There was great enthusiasm in our town about it. That is, until they were expected to attend as well as to learn to do it on their own. How can we encourage other parents to make the selfless choice to choose investing in their kids over their jobs or their personal interests?
That's hard. That's, because school provides subsidized childcare. It's very difficult to get around this practical benefit. And so to say, how do we get parents to be more selfless and to prioritize their kids over their jobs? Well, if you can hardly afford your house in the first place, I don't know. That's a tough one. Matt, I hope you have an answer to this.
I'm not sure if I have an answer. I have a response. And the response is that as you develop a self-directed learner, the need for childcare actually drops way, way down, almost to zero. Now, again, I'm not sure the age of the families involved here, but in my experience, by the age of 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that, if there is a consistent supportive environment of helping the child learn how to make decisions for themselves, they actually can function really, really autonomously at a really remarkably early age by our context in this current environment. 100 years ago, that would have been no big deal for a 10-year-old to handle themselves. So to the family, yes, parents will need to play a role, but that role is probably pretty short. And the children then become their own leaders, and then the parent moves into a coaching role, which is very different than what most people think of in homeschooling, which is I now have to stand over these children. I now have to program. I now have to teach. I now have to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my thought to that. Thanks for the question, though.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard to convince people who don't want to homeschool to homeschool. I mean, it really is a lifestyle choice. But, if your child is suffering where they are, or, it's just not working for them, you don't want to keep them there another minute. So you just have to get with the program, I think, as a parent, and really advocate for your child while you have your child in your house, because that time goes so quickly. And, you don't want them to spend their whole 20s, undoing the damage of what, that consecutive harm has done.
Well, I think we need another language. Homeschool is not what any of us are really advocating. So, but Kathy, why don't you go ahead? Kath, why don't you go ahead and give the question that we ask our guests to Blake, and then we'll start closing this out.
Yeah. So the question I always ask is, what do you think should exist in towns or, in the infrastructure of society to support self-directed learners?
Is this a publicly funded program you're imagining?
I'm imagining what should exist. For parents out there, what do you think would be the best possible addition to a town's infrastructure to support
Let's call it
them?
public funds if there are public funds available.
Town's infrastructure. I like Peter Gray's idea of just taking the public library and expanding it wildly. And I think that the whole ethos of the library, and John Taylor Gatto wrote about this too, one of the most remarkable lines from his books for me was, why is it that we all support public parks and public libraries, but there's so much contention around public schools? And I think the answer is pretty clear now, which is that one involves compulsion and the others don't. And so take that library, that non-compulsive library, expand it to include things like co-working spaces, maker spaces, make it look something like Workspace Connecticut looked like, Kath, and stock it with helpful adults. Yes, there need to be ground rules. You can't just have like roving gangs of kids, burning books, doing whatever they feel like. But if you have this library ethos, people walk in and they cross this barrier and they say, oh, this is a place where I'm quiet. This is a place where we're meant to work on things in the same way that a co-working space, you have that magical transition. And so if somehow we can make libraries bigger and better and more accessible to all, I would love to see that.
Yeah,
me too.
Amazing. Okay, so here's my question, Blake. There's a lot of folks that are going to stay in the traditional environment, and so what's one thing that if you could wave your magic wand that you would change about the traditional educational environment to make it a place that's healthier, better for kids? What would that be?
I'm with Ken Danford on this one, and I say you can keep everything in place, just make every class optional. and so that's another way of saying you could nudge it in the direction of how college works. You can say there's a required number of units that you need to get a degree from this place, your high school diploma, but it's really up to you how you're going to go about this. We're going to expand the number of offerings. You're going to be able to get credit for doing things that are independent study or field work, and just put in enough units and pace it as you desire, and when you finish, we'll give you your high school diploma.
Wow, that's so radically simple, and there's no chance of that happening anytime soon.
Never, ever.
Well, listen, Blake, as always, it's great talking with you. And for Michael and Kath and I, and when school's not working, we want to thank you for being on the show. Would love to have you back at some point. Again, folks, take a look at this book. Remind us the name, Blake.
why are you still sending your kids to school?
Good deal. And also the work that you do. Sorry,
Unschooling Adventures.
Unschool Adventures.
And the great Not Back to School camp that you run.
Yes, that's not mine. I'm an employee there. Yes, Not Back to School camp is wonderful, and my podcast is Off Trail Learning.
Off Trail Learning, great. Thanks a lot, Blake. Blake Boles, everybody. Appreciate you being on the show tonight.
It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
All right.